our website, which is ruralcouncilsvictoria.org. I think that's right, ruralcouncilsvictoria.org.au.
Correct.
So if anybody has any objection to that, I'm not sure what happens if you have an objection. Perhaps you either don't speak or turn your camera off. I'm not sure what. So we're going to start recording now. So welcome everybody, and I'm Councillor Mary Ann Brown. I'm the Chair of Rural Councils Victoria, and I'm also a councillor at Southern Grampians Shire, which is in the western part of the state. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands, wherever you may be today, their rich culture and connection to country, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I also acknowledge elders from other communities who may be meeting with us today. Here in the Southern Grampians, the traditional owners of the land are the Gudjadamara, Djapboring and Budjati people. I'd also like to extend a very warm welcome to the mayors, councillors, CEOs and staff from across Victoria who are joining us today. We've had a really strong response to this webinar, which is really pleasing to see. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to the Rural Councils Victoria Committee members who are also joining in. This is the second Rural Councils webinar for 2023, and it's a new initiative we've undertaken, and the idea is to sort of complement the forum which occurs every year. And just to give you a heads up, we've got a date in July, which I believe is the 12th of July, and it's going to be at Echuca, so there'll be more information about the forum. We're currently putting together that program. We're hosting this webinar in conjunction with FinPro, which is the not-for-profit who support local government finance professionals. And I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Bradley Thomas, who's the CEO of Hepburn Shire, but he's also the president of FinPro. Bradley, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you to the team at Rural Councils Victoria, who I think are doing a magnificent job, and a credit to yourselves, particularly with this report as well. Can I also pay my respects to traditional owners? I'm coming to you live from downtown beautiful Daylesford and on Jar Jar Wurrung lands. FinPro, yes, really pleased to be partnering with Rural Councils Victoria. We did a report in conjunction with the MAV just before Christmas, and we tabled that, which really looked at the financial sustainability and challenges as a sector, and really identified, I suppose, that deteriorating underlying surplus, significant asset renewal gap, the compounding effect of rate capping, and really, which I think is really concerning for the sector, really reducing unrestricted cash positions, particularly when you back out carry forwards and early grant payments. So we're working together with a number of peak bodies, including the RCV, and yeah, excited to have a number of our members here as well, and looking forward to the presentation. So thank you, and I'll share the link to the report just in the chat. So for those that haven't seen it, hopefully it's a good read. And back to you, Marianne. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bradley, and we really appreciate it. I'd like to welcome the staff from SGS Economics and Planning, who have very kindly agreed to discuss the research they conducted for Rural Councils Victoria last year. So with us today we have Marcus Spiller, who's the principal and partner, Emily Hobbs, who's an associate and partner, and Tom Milverton, the consultant. Just to give you some background to this research into alternative income streams for local government was initiated by Rural Councils Victoria with funding from Regional Development Victoria's Thriving Rural Victoria program. The committee was very keen to determine whether there were other ways to help ourselves. You're probably all aware we're often sort of crying poor, and particularly rural councils are very challenged financially, as their main sources of income are rates and grants. So we were really keen to see if there were ways to bring in more income to resource-strapped councils in order to continue to provide the level of service our communities are looking for. After a RFQ process, we put our trust in SGS Economics and Planning, who conducted an international search. They surveyed governments across Australia and completed follow-up interviews. As to what they've found, I'll leave that to the presenters to explain. I just wanted to also mention that this research is being presented at a plenary session at the Planning Institute of Australia's Regional, Rural and Remote Conference, which is being held on the 22nd and 23rd of March. And well done to SGS Economics. I think this is a topic that we will be talking about for some time. And this report provides really good evidence for those conversations. We hope that in listening today, you can use this information in any advocacy you have with both state and federal government. And it would be great to see this data being used to pressure other levels of government to support us, and particularly our small communities. So I'm going to hand over now to Tom Milverton, who I think is going to lead the presentation. Thank you, Tom. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Yeah, as you've mentioned, I'm joined here today by Emily Hobbs and Marcus Spiller. Did you guys just both want to introduce yourselves quickly, and I'll bring the slides up?
Yeah, hi, Emily Hobbs, as Councillor Brown mentioned, associate and partner at SGS, and a strategic planner by trade with lots of experience with rural local government. And I'll just shout out also to Mark Davies, who is not in the room, but Mark Davies from FinPro was also part of our team and is a local government financial expert as well. So just acknowledging his contributions to this project. Marcus?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Marcus Spiller, I'm a principal and partner at SGS Economics and Planning. I had the great pleasure of working with Emily and Tom on this. And I'll leave the way clear for them to speak.
Thank you. And also just a heads up with sharing the screen, I can't see any hands up or anything. So let me know if anyone has hands up as we go. So to start off with, it's just being a bit slow. There we go. The purpose of this project was to identify a range of new sustainable own source income options for rural and regional councils. And to investigate this, we conducted a review of the legislative framework and all the past research that had been done on this area. We had a look at all the annual reports of councils in Victoria, and we were particularly concerned with that other income column, and conducted a thorough review of those. We also surveyed local governments across Australia, and for this, the surveys were distributed through a wide variety of networks, such as the Local Government Information Unit, FinPro, and the Australian Local Government Association. And we also contacted councils and individuals directly. And in total, I think we almost got to about 500 different organisations and individual people and councils that we reached out to in the end. The result of the survey was that there was 68 responses across Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia and WA. And 20 follow-up interviews were conducted, and some of those were also with some larger organisations, and we conducted 2 workshops as well. And we also conducted an international best practice review of opportunities in comparable jurisdictions. So essentially, the key findings from the research was that rural and remote communities have less capacity to pay, and that's in the sense of their rate base and the people that the councils are relying on to raise funds and capital. The legislative framework that councils are operating within, they provide a higher degree of flexibility. So that's in relation to the Local Government Act of 2020, which gave councils a bit more freedom in how they explore other income sources and entrepreneurial activities and businesses for council. But what we found is that there is no cover-all solution for councils to have to achieve financial security. Essentially, looking at alternative income options is one area to explore, but councils ultimately rely on grant funding and other areas to raise money. As I mentioned, enterprises and businesses are an untapped opportunity for many councils. The establishment of entrepreneurial enterprises and businesses leveraging councils' local and existing assets represents the most significant and largely untapped opportunity. However, this does present some difficulties as it's limited by a lack of in-house skills and capacity and a catalyst of funding resources. And essentially, revenue raising is only one part of council securing financial security.
I was just going to add to that, Tom, that an important component of that fourth point about entrepreneurial enterprises and business opportunity, largely we also found that it's quite place dependent. So those councils that are leveraging those opportunities have kind of specific local characteristics which they can draw on. And so that kind of then feeds into the fact that there is no cover-all solution because each rural and regional council is quite unique in terms of its physical, its attributes, its infrastructure assets, the capacity of its internal teams and its resources as well. So yes, it's quite unique to play. So there's no single silver bullet that applies to all councils across Victoria.
Thanks. So what does all this mean for local government? So what we found out and what we know is that councils are innovative. Councils innovate and adapt based on available resources and local advantages. This includes leveraging digital innovations. So in some other work that we've done, we found, the report found that over 90% of Queensland councils said that they would use technology like enterprise software to pool resources with neighbouring councils, which is up 10% from 2015. But essentially, councils have rejected a proprietary approach to information and data, instead freely sharing information to help deliver improved community outcomes. However, this is proved more difficult for regional and rural councils. Councils are efficient. Local governments have become organisations that operate with extreme efficiencies given their limited resources. Other work that SGS has done suggests that local governments are more productive per dollar compared to both state and federal government. And rural and regional councils do more with less. So rural and regional councils are particularly dependent on grant. However, rural and regional councils have sparse populations with smaller rate bases and covering larger geographies. And this means that it's a higher cost per capita in the provision of essential services like roads, sewerage and water. And this is compounded by the fact that there's a shrinkage in the ratepayer base within rural and regional councils, and this severely impacts financial stability. So because councils are reliant on state and federal government grants, this is made even more difficult by in today's context of rate capping. But essentially what all this means is that while the funding options recommended on the following few slides can help diversify alternative funding options for councils, ultimately it won't be something that solves everything for councils. There's no golden egg. It's a range of options that need to be considered carefully by councils, and it doesn't solve the broader local government funding issues. But councils should be confident in seeking state and federal funding, and councils should also be confident in joint advocacy, seeking reform in funding arrangements.
So Tom,
yeah.
if I can just jump in there and reiterate that point, because I think that's one of the main messages from this work, and that is that state and federal government can't really look local government in the eye, and in particular rural and remote councils in the eye, and say you're not doing enough to tap your funding sources. You're not efficient enough. You're not innovative enough. Our work shows that in fact councils are leading the government sector in terms of efficiency, but they are working under funding constraints imposed by state and federal government. And really, the solution lies ultimately at the feet of state and federal government. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Marcus. So I can pause here for some questions if we've got any questions at this point, or I can hold till the end, whatever's the preference. If there are questions, just let me know because I can't see.
Not at this stage, Marcus, so keep going.
Great,
Sorry.
thank you. No worries. So in total, we identified in the report 21 alternative funding options for councils to consider, and we grouped them on based on the 3 Horizons framework. So the 3 Horizons framework was originally formulated in the context of commercial business planning, but it's highly adaptable to planning endeavours in public policy. The 3 Horizons framework assists in balancing tensions between the visionary and the pragmatic in the development of strategies. So on the first horizon, we've got leveraging existing competencies and which can be implemented relatively readily. The second horizon looks for ways to innovate, but within the scope of existing competencies. And the third horizon contemplates aspirational ideas. So it's blue sky thinking, longer term commitments that more than likely will require a joint advocacy effort. But the 3 horizons aren't meant to be considered independently or exclusively of each other. Government must simultaneously maintain a focus on all 3 horizons.
So just to reiterate Tom's point is we use this as a bit of an organising framework for ourselves. We were obviously receiving lots of case studies and suggestions from all of the interviews and through the survey. And so I think, you know, in laying out, we'll kind of step through some other organising principles, but in terms of laying out where councils might want to target their efforts in terms of picking up and adapting or adopting some of these options, it kind of, you know, it does help to give a sense about which ones are kind of within our current framing and existing competencies, where we're kind of really reaching for a bit of a stretch target. And I think that, as Tom said, I think that the image there or the graph is kind of a little bit misleading in that each of these 3 or multiple opportunities can be pursued across each of these 3 horizons all at once. So we'll kind of talk more about what these are and also get into a bit more detail about how we might weigh up each of these. Sorry, Tom, back to you.
Cheers. Yeah, so on that, we also organised the options into this matrix of risk versus return. So this looks at each of the income options and places it on this graph based on the risk and the revenue yield. So we ideally, you'd hope to identify the majority of options that fall within the bottom right quadrant, where there's low risk but high revenue yield. However, this is not the case because many of the options often require significant skills and resources from council, and the risk often increases and the revenue yield decreases for a lot of these options. And when we talk about risk here, we're talking about risk being a proxy for the degree of difficulty that implementing this would have for council, and also the financial risk. So it can often be quite difficult for councils to pursue some of these as they maintain that expectation that funds are used efficiently and responsibly. So it's really a bit of a balancing act in terms of getting it right and looking at which of these would really apply in your area based on your existing attributes and strengths and skills in-house, and what you think would be worth pursuing, essentially. So the way that we've broken it up is that we're going to look at 2 options from each of the horizons in a little bit more detail on the following slides. Emma, Marcus, did you have anything to add to this slide?
No, thanks.
Yep. Yeah, that sounds really good, Tom. Is there any questions about this matrix or the organising frameworks potentially before we dive in? Obviously, there's a lot of options here. We've chosen 6 to present, and obviously the full rundown is in the report. But in terms of, hopefully this is all pretty clear and makes sense to everyone. I'm sure it will. Seems good, Tom. Back to you.
So just looking at the first horizon, we've identified these, sorry, it hasn't changed. There we go. These two, and number 2 and 6 of the options. So commercialising council's existing asset base and the full cost recovery through service charges. So in terms of commercialising council's existing asset base, there's an opportunity to explore the untapped potential in existing asset bases to generate additional income. This can be through leveraging underutilised council office floor space. This is sort of emerged as an opportunity through COVID as there's a lot more people working from home, and some councils have looked to lease out extra floor space. Or there's also the options of when councils have redeveloped offices, they've done things like create co-working spaces and other areas to lease out. And there's a real opportunity here too to align these sorts of options with your economic development strategy too, and playing a part there. So you're ticking a few boxes when you're pursuing these sorts of ones. So Logan City Council in Queensland, they're looking at this sort of thing in a lot more detail. They haven't started pursuing any of it yet. It's quite early stages, but some of the things that have been explored is leasing out parks as wedding venues, and really maximising the advertising leasing space on bus shelters, street banners and billboards. The second one on the screen here is full cost recovery through service charges. So what we found through the research is that often councils don't fully understand or appreciate the cost of the services that they provide. So what we recommend here is doing a bit of a review of what the costs are to your services, and fully, if you review them, you can get a better sense of what the costs are today. It might have changed over the years, and you can. The good thing about this is that the service charges are not included in the rate cap and can be set at full cost recovery. Em, did you want to add anything to the cost recovery and service charges section?
I think that was a finding through one of the Productivity Commission reports as well, and certainly a reflection of Mark Davies as a former CEO, that the feeling that that full accounting of costs, obviously this ties into kind of local capacity to pay in rural and regional areas, and I know that there's political considerations around this as well, about lifting service charges, but generally as felt, and Mark reflected this, that there was a tendency to undercost services across a variety of councils.
Thanks, Em. And looking at the second horizon, so here we've pulled out numbers 10 and 11. So upgrading to fibre optic cable and completing pipeline renewal projects, and generating income from waste. So in terms of number 10, waste generation, councils dealing with waste is currently a major cost to councils, but the industry is seeing improvements and innovations. So essentially, the waste industry is increasingly seen as one with great potential to generate both resources and income. As demand for green waste grows for a variety of reprocessing purposes, councils could consider how to maximise the potential of their waste collection and disposal. This can be in the form of selling green waste to the private industry. It's also the potential to explore waste to energy plants, and this is gaining attention for local governments and the private sector. Waste to energy involves turning waste material into heat or electricity as a final opportunity for material made that would otherwise go to landfill. In 2021, the Victorian State Government released the Victorian Waste to Energy Framework, and this framework sets out to change the way waste to energy in Victoria is managed, but recognises that appropriate investment in waste to energy will support jobs, growth and economic development. And there are some changes through this about permits and how to go about implementing waste to energy plants. And essentially, Victoria's landfill levy between 2020 and 2023 has almost doubled. So it's really increasing cost for council there. So any ways to reduce costs through those sorts of measures would be really beneficial to councils. Another interesting one is upgrading fibre optic cable when completing pipeline renewal projects. So a lot of councils will be undertaking this already. And one way that one council has done it, which was Coffs Harbour City Council, was when they were completing extensive pipeline renewal works, they were also laying fibre optic cables at the same time. And they developed such a strong skill set in this that they were able to lease out and do these projects for other neighbouring councils. And they've developed such a strong network in their fibre optic cables that they've been able to lease out this to private companies, and that they can also use this network. Yes, I think that's a really interesting one that, I mean, it's really building on work that councils are often having to undertake anyway as a major infrastructure upgrade.
This one's probably also a good point to the extent, you know, if there's specific expertise in-house, as we were kind of saying in the opening statements, that each council is quite different, have a different, likely, because of that, have different areas or skills of expertise in-house, and it also opens up an opportunity to kind of on-sell or offer specialist services across council. So in this case, it's laying fibre optic cables, but it could be that council has a specific strength around whatever, I can't even think, you know, GIS spatial skills, or it could be anything really, that you could offer at a fee to either councils or to other councils or external, which also streamlines resourcing a little bit potentially across LGAs.
Thanks.
Just while we're on a break from the flow, I just wanted to maybe address the question from James Bone about whether there's a general formula for charging rates for public spaces. We're not aware of any general formulas. I think the general approach would be to charge what the market will bear. But there are some councils around that make extensive use of this approach. I know, for example, that the City of Melbourne makes a lot of money out of providing access to its parks and gardens. For example, they're setting up for the Garden Festival in the Carlton Gardens as we speak, and I'm sure that will be generating, well, many tens of thousands of dollars. So you could get, I think, from some experienced councils, the going rate for, say, hosting a wedding in a park or other significant corporate events, etc. But it certainly is an opportunity. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks. So that brings us to the third horizon. So we pulled out here number 18, parking fines reform, and number 21, minimum general purpose grant reform. So again, these options are sort of longer term options that would require the advocacy from council and organisations and reform of legislation and the systems that we operate within. So in terms of reform of minimum grant requirements, there's an opportunity to have Commonwealth Government amend legislation to remove the minimum grant requirements and have these funds redirected to rural councils. As it currently operates, the minimum general purpose grant for a council is, as it's actually written, is to not be not less than the amount to which it would be entitled if 30% of total amount of general purpose grants were allocated on a per capita basis. This ensures that all local governments receive an allocation, even if the relevant grants commission formula would result in a zero allocation. So what this results in is often it unfairly advantages the inner and middle ring metropolitan local governments. So if they were not going to receive an allocation, that they'll still receive that minimum amount. And what we're suggesting here is that that formula essentially be scrapped, and it could, in principle, it should be removed and be allocated more fairly to rural local governments who, without it, essentially would receive more. And Marcus, I might let you talk through the parking fines reform.
I'd be happy to, Tom.
Thank you, Marcus.
So remember, we're in the third horizon here. We're really in the innovative space. So the proposition here is that metropolitan councils make a lot of money out of parking fines. In fact, I just looked it up. The City of Melbourne's going to pull in about $41 million in parking fines this year. Now, the argument here is that the only reason why the City of Melbourne has that revenue is because it happens to be at the hub of the Victorian economy. But that Victorian economy includes all the rural and regional councils, includes the whole state. The whole state makes it possible for the City of Melbourne to generate $41 million a year in parking fines. And equity would suggest that at least part of that revenue stream should be shared with the contributors to the economic vitality that manifests in demand for and payment of parking spaces in the central city. So it's only, if you like, by luck. It's not by good management or anything else, but just the dictates of geography that particular local council has the benefit of those parking fines when those parking fines are actually made possible by the whole state community and should be shared with the whole state community. So that would be the pitch to state government.
Thanks, Marcus. So I guess this brings us to a recap of the findings, a bit of summary of the presentation. So what we found is there is no cover-all solution for councils to achieve financial security. It will come in exploring new income options, but also councils will remain heavily reliant on grant funding. Revenue raising is just one part of council securing financial security. The flip side of that is that councils should also consider cost-saving measures. So these recommendations focus on alternative incomes, but what we found throughout the research was there's the recurring recommendation around cost savings and shared services. We understand that shared services is something that has been tried recently and was not all too successful. However, there's I think a lot of that might have come in the issue in terms of how that program was set out to be implemented. And I think there still is a lot of potential around shared services between councils, and there's something worth being explored. We found councils are innovative and efficient. Rural councils do more with less, considering in comparison to their metropolitan counterparts and their smaller rate bases. And just that key point that councils should be confident in seeking state and federal funding and seeking funding reform. So some of those third horizons recommendations, while some of them are a bit out there blue sky, I still think some of those funding reform options, things like minimum grant reform, is something to really be considered, and would really change funding resourcing in Victoria, and what would that mean for rural and regional councils. If there was anything I missed, Em or Marcus, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we can go to questions too.
No, I think that's a very good briefing, Tom. I'd be interested to hear reflections and questions.
I might just kick off. I thought it was very interesting, and it really enforces or emphasises the strength of the case for rural councils getting a better share of government funding. Councillor Rod Ward from Moorabool's posted, and what about if 50% of the fine incurred was returned to the LGA of the registered home address of the person or entity fined? I'm not sure. Does that mean that we think that perhaps more people from outside the Melbourne city area are actually getting parking fines? So that's probably just a comment, or I think that's probably a comment rather than a question or a suggestion, Rod. Yeah, thank you. So are there any other questions or comments in regard to what we've heard so far today? I think I can see if anyone puts a hand up. Rod, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Marianne, and thank you for the presentation. It was fantastic, and I suppose it just gets people and LGAs thinking of what opportunities may be present. My question is I'd like to share that with my colleagues, that presentation that weren't able to attend today. Will that presentation be distributed to those that are online?
Hey, do you want to? Yeah.
Yes. Rod, I'll be sending out the recording to everybody present, and feel free to forward that on. FinPro will also get a copy, and that will go into a members update that is going out this week, I think. And it'll also end up on the RCV website as well. So there'll be a number of avenues to access it, to forward on to colleagues and councillors who might have missed today live.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kate.
And the link's in the chat, as is the report that FinPro completed with the MAV at the end of last year. So if you wanted to have a look at that. Just, Tom, following up from your comment, the Rural Councils Transformation Program, I think the second tranche of that, I think the general view is that that is going to be a lot more beneficial for councils than the first tranche. Certainly I know my council's in a partnership with two other rural councils, and the outcome has been so far excellent, and that's some of the feedback we're hearing. Probably the unfortunate aspect is that there was probably money wasted in the first tranche, but there are lessons that have been learnt, I think, as a result of that. So I think just about all rural councils did receive funding in the second tranche, and we're going to be pursuing that to see what the outcomes are. But initially, the feedback has been very good. So, yeah. Are there any other questions or comments while we've got the presenters? Kate, you've got your hand up? No? No.
I was just going to comment that, of course, there's the report will be a good source of information for digging a little bit deeper on what those options are. We've done a bit of a kind of quick fly through in an hour with the kind of the key takeaways, I guess, being the primary message. But if you're interested, we can also share. You've probably received the report already, but those other options are given more voice and substantiated in the report as well.
I think, Emily, the presentation gives a real flavour of the type of information which is very useful. David Ray, you've got your hand up.
Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Councillor Brown. Just a question whether or not the work undertaken by KPMG back in 2017 was referenced as part of this, and what followed through in terms of some of those learnings in into your work. And I guess what that work did foreshadow was the sector, particularly rural and regional councils, needed a package of measures to ensure long-term sustainability. And out of that was the Rural Council's transformation program. And Moyne Shire, who I work for, I'm Director of Corporate Services at Moyne, along with Warnable City and Crangamite, we're fortunate beneficiaries of round one. We're one of 2 remaining councils left in that space. So we're actually proceeding quite well in terms of our shared service initiative. And I think I'm happy to stay in contact with yourselves in terms of how we succeed or otherwise with that project, because I think it's a really important test case for the sector to ensure we get success and prove to government that it is capable, shared services is capable of being delivered, in a rural context.
Thanks, David. Just in terms of your question regarding the KPMG report, so we did, I guess that was somewhat of a launching pad for this piece of work. So that report explored in kind of more fulsome, or took a broader view of financial sustainability for councils. And one of its recommendations was to have a deep exploration of alternative funding, alternative own source income sources, to repeat myself. So that report was the launching pad, and this was a drill down into kind of one of those recommendations for that report.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Just another reflection, really. It's more of a abstraction from the question rather than directly referencing it. Our brief kind of directed us to look at new revenue sources, as opposed to looking at the cost structures under which councils work under. And a lot of the reform process that state government, basically I'll say the state government rather than the Commonwealth government, basically the state government's response to the structural financial problems of local governments, and certainly so in rural areas, is to say, what can we do to bring your costs down? And so shared services is part of that. And, that's good. And we have reflected some of that in our work. But I also wanted to raise in this forum that we're possibly getting to a point where we need to think carefully about when cost reductions are a good thing and when they're not. Because in many rural situations, the expenditures of local councils are really important to the local economy. They're a way in which community wealth building occurs, and there are kind of benefits attaching to more self-containment. So I don't want to be contradicting, I don't want to be sending out confusing messages, but I'm just sharing with you a dilemma which says, on the one hand, we want councils to reduce their costs so that they can be more sustainable. But on the other hand, we want them to be the agents of stronger local communities. And you can get to the point where you cut costs to a level where you perhaps compromise the sustainability of the local economy. So yeah, I think state governments have a strategic policy question to confront here, but by enabling local councils to, let's say, carry higher costs than would otherwise be possible. But if you get a whole bunch of other community benefits because of that, it still could be a good deal. So it's a dilemma that we're all got to work on.
And I think the other factor is the reality. Communities expect a range of services, and often in rural areas you have market failure. So councils are looked to provide those services, which are often subsidised by ratepayers. Vaughan, you've got your hand up. Vaughan Williams.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I'd like to thank RCV, SGS and FinPro for putting this out, because I read it when it came out in November, and I've summarised it and presented to council, and I thought it was just a fabulous tool to consider the framework and the 21 suggestions, along with the sort of summarisation of all of the reviews that have gone on subsequently, it's been, or in the past rather, it's been a really good tool to think about what can we do about looking at alternative sources of revenue. And it's certainly something that we're going to use the 4-quadrant thing with the risk versus revenue yield and the 21 suggestions and how it's mapped on there. That's given us a really good framework. What we're going to do is we've gone through the 21, picked out the ones that are most doable and the things that we would most like to do, and then we're going to map it over that quadrant using our own information and see how we go there. But no, I thought it was a really good report.
Thanks, Vaughan. Really appreciate that feedback. And I think the level of interest today, there'll probably hopefully be more people having those thoughts as well. So thank you for that. Are there any further questions? Okay. I think in light of that, we'll wrap it up. I'd like to thank Tom, Emily and Marcus both for the presentation today, because I think it's given us a very clear sense of that report. So if you haven't read it, there's the opportunity to look at the full report. I think there's some really useful information there, both for individual councils, but also for Rural Councils Victoria in terms of our advocacy work. Because we obviously, most of us are probably in the budget process at the moment, and we're hearing that the long-term financial future, particularly for rural councils, is not great. So I think there's this really gives us a strong evidence base to support those conversations. Probably just a comment, the politics of eliminating the minimum grant could be a challenge. Certainly we have discussed that some time ago at rural councils, whether that would be part of our advocacy, and also perhaps approaching Melbourne City Council for a distribution of some of their parking income could also be challenging too. But I think it's certainly worth trying to have those conversations. So I thank everybody for their contribution today, and also for all those that have signed up. This is not the end of this conversation. I'm sure there'll be more conversations down the track. So thank you again. And just a reminder, the Rural Councils Forum is on the 12th of July in Echuca. So pencil that in. So thank you very much. And thank you, Bradley, to FinPro for supporting us today. I think it's just, it's really good to get the word out there more widely, as this is a challenge that's facing most of our councils. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Marianne and team.